Right, guys, let's look at the answers to exercise 2 on quadratic equations. Right, we should know that the general approach for quadratic equations is to get one side equal to 0, then to factorize, because ultimately you want factors multiplied together to give you 0, because how could you possibly have two things multiplied together to give you 0 unless one of them was 0 or the other one was 0? And therefore, that's how we could get two different answers. Let's have a look. Question A says x squared minus 4x equals 5. So my first task is to get one side equal to 0, which means I'm going to choose the right-hand side, which means I need to minus 5 from both sides, and I can get it equal to 0. Step 1 done. Step 2 says I should factorize. Now in grade 10, all the quadratic equations which we do can be factorized. In grade 11, we'll learn a new method in case they can't be factorized. So this one's relatively easy because the only possibilities to multiply together to get 5 are 5 and 1. Now if it's negative 5, there must be different signs. And if it's negative 4x when I add them together, I think I must get negative 5 and plus 1. But let me check. X squared, yes. Minus 5x plus an x will give me minus 4x and minus 5. I always check because it just avoids me making any silly mistakes. Okay. Now, I must have this equal to 0 here. I mustn't forget it out, because the whole idea is that if I have two factors multiplied together to give me 0, either x plus 1 must be 0 or x minus 5 must be 0. One of those facts has to be true. So on the one side, I get x is equal to negative 1. On the other side, I get x could be equal to 5. Now, if you have a chance in a test, I would go substitute each of those back in and just check whether I'm right. Okay, let's look at the next one. I must always get one side equal to 0. Now this one is an interesting one because it's got a mess over here. So I personally would write out what x minus 1 squared means. And if I have to get one side equal to 0 and get three different terms, my mind immediately thinks I should multiply out, collect up like terms, and get one side equal to 0. Which means I'm going to square out this bracket. I'm going to multiply. So x times x, I still have my 2. X times x, x squared. Minus x would give me minus 2x. And minus 1 times minus 1 will be plus 1 equals 8. Which means I can multiply in with my 2, 2x squared, minus 4x, plus 2 equals 8. Cool, now I can get one side equal to 0, 2x squared minus 4x. If I minus 8 on both sides, I will get minus 6 equals to 0. Now I need to factorize. Now don't jump into the trinomial. Why don't we first see whether there's a highest common factor? And I think that there's a highest common factor of 2, which means either I could factorize out the highest common factor of 2, or why can't I just divide every single term by 2? I'm allowed to do that in the equation as long as I divide everything by 2. So I get x squared minus 2x minus 3 gives me 0. Now why I generally do that is it makes my trinomial far easier to factorize, because now it's very obvious that this must be a 3 and a 1, because that's the only way I can get 3. Negative means that 1 must be a minus, 1 must be a plus, and if this is negative 2, I think it'll be that way around. Now let me check. X squared minus 3x plus an x minus 2x, and minus times a plus would be negative 3. Great, so I have two things multiplied together to give me 0. So either x plus 1 must be 0, or x minus 3 must be 0. So I could minus 1 from both sides, and I can add 3 to both sides. And again, I would go and check whether those worked out. Now I'm going to scroll back up here because some people do this a very different way. Now there's nothing wrong with a different way, but we tend to make mistakes. So I'm just going to start again. What some people do is they see the square there and they immediately think, good, I can square root. Now, I would divide by 2 on both sides before I wanted to square root. Sorry, divide by 2 on both sides, so then I can square root. Why can't I square root? Absolutely. You are perfectly allowed to square root as long as you square root both sides. And the square root of something squared, it just returns itself. And what's the square root of 4? The square root of 4 is 2. And I've got a linear equation. How easy. So I add 1 to both sides, and I get x is 3. Now something's clearly gone wrong here, because x is equal to 3 is an answer. But where did that go? Why didn't I get x is equal to minus 1? And this is why I'm not the biggest fan of this method, because people forget that the square root of 4 is the positive or negative square root of 4. So people forget that there is another entire option, and the other option is that the negative square root of 4 is negative 2. Wouldn't negative 2 times negative 2 also give me 4? Now, if I add 1 to both sides, that's where my second answer disappeared to. Now, if I wrote down all of that with both answers and both square roots, that's a perfectly acceptable method to solve this equation. But what I find is people forget that half. So I'm not a massive fan of this particular way of solving quadratic equations. I prefer to stick to the traditional route. But if you do want to square root, just remember that the square root of 4 has two different answers. Okay, let's go to the next one. Now this one, there is no square root. So there's no square here. So this definitely isn't one I can do both ways. So immediately my mind thinks multiply out, collect up like terms, get one side equal to 0. So 3x times x will be 3x squared. 3x times 4 over 3. If you don't like fractions, use your calculator. But I know that this is 3 over 1. So 3 and 3 will cancel. So I know immediately that this will be 4x. Let me just do that a bit more slowly. So it's 3x over 1 times 4 over 3. So I'm saying 3 goes into itself once, and I just get 4x over 1. And that equals 15. And now it's a straightforward equation. I would minus 15 from both sides in order to get one side equal to 0. So I get 3x squared plus 4x minus 15 equals 0. I always check for a common factor in case I can divide everything by that common factor, but I don't see one in this case, which means this must be 3x and this must be x equals 0. So 3 and 1 are obvious. 15 is less obvious. It could be 5 and 3. Now that would give me 15 and that would give me 3, which won't give me 4 as my middle term. That would give me 9 and that would give me 5. That could work. So if it was 3 times the 3 and 5 times the 1, that would give me 4. But now I need positive 4. So I need a positive 9 and a minus 4. So I think that needs to be positive. So my 9x is positive, and minus 5x would give me 4x. Now let me just check very quickly. 3x squared, tick. 9x, take away 5x, 4x, minus 15, tick. Which means I have two things multiplied together to give me 0. So either 3x minus 5 must be 0, or x plus 3 must be 0. Now this one's relatively easy. I minus 3 on both sides. Here I would plus 5 to both sides, and then I would divide by 3 on both sides. So I have two different answers. Now do yourself a favor. Quadratic equations, there's only a certain amount of different ways we could write them out to make you solve them. So practice, practice, practice. Good luck.